Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Dr. Wade. This show was created for and inspired by the thousands of patients I've served. So it's time for me to speak up and speak out on their behalf. With a wide range of experts, we bring you weekly insights diving deep into topics of controversy to bust through the sugarcoating that keeps you and your family stuck in the mainstream. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode on building fences. This started as a result of a philosophy, and a philosophy that was in contrast to maybe the mainstream line of thought. And history has a way of shaping and forming. And I want to go back a step. Where I first heard this poem, it was done by John Denver. And not only was John Denver an incredible entertainer, he was a pilot as well, and that's how he ended up dying. He crashed in his plane. He was not afraid to speak up about prevention and his alternative viewpoints on health. And what I really appreciated about that was, as growing up and listening to his music with a very musical family, with my father singing and basically involved in music our whole life, is that he was somebody who was successful and still would stand up and speak his truth. And he recited one time on stage, and you can see this on YouTube. The poem is called The Ambulance Down in the Valley, and it's written by Joseph Malins, and it's back from circa 1895, which is also a special date, as that was when chiropractic was discovered by D.D. Palmer. And so here's how the poem goes, and it tells a story. And I think this story is important. It's about seeing where the roots of healthcare started and how this fable tells a story about our history. 'Twas a dangerous cliff, as they freely confessed, though to walk near its crest was so pleasant. But over its terrible edge there had slipped a duke, and full many a peasant. The people said something would have to be done, but their projects did not at all tally. Some said, put a fence around the edge of the cliff. Some, an ambulance down in the valley. The lament of the crowd was profound and was loud, as their tears overflowed with their pity. But the cry from the ambulance carried the day as it spread throughout the neighboring city. A collection was made to accumulate aid, and the dwellers in highway and alley gave dollars and cents, not to furnish a fence, but an ambulance down in the valley. For the cliff is all right if you're careful, they said, and if folks ever slip and are dropping, it isn't the slipping that hurts them so much as the shock down below when they're stopping. So for years we have heard, as the mishaps occurred, quick forth and the rescuers sally, to pick up the victims who fell from the cliff with the ambulance down in the valley. Said one in a plea, it's a marvel to me that you'd give so much greater attention to repairing results than to curing the cause. You had much better aim at prevention. For the mischief, of course, should be stopped at its source. Come, neighbors and friends, let us rally. It is far better sense to rely on a fence than an ambulance down in the valley. He is wrong in his head, the majority said. He would end all our earnest endeavor. He's a man who would shirk this responsible work, but we will support it forever. Aren't we picking up all just as fast as they fall and giving them care liberally? A superfluous fence is of no consequence if the ambulance works in the valley. But a sensible few, who are practical too, will not bear with such nonsense much longer. They believe that prevention is better than cure, and their party will soon be much stronger. Encourage them then, with your purse, voice, and pen, and while other philanthropists dally, they will scorn all pretense and put up a stout fence on the cliff that hangs over the valley. Better guide while the young than reclaim them when old, for the voice of true wisdom is calling. To rescue the fallen is good, but 'tis best to prevent other people from falling. Better close up the source of temptation and crime than deliver from dungeon or galley. Put a strong fence round the top of the cliff than an ambulance down in the valley. This poem specifically addresses the contrast between prevention, such as building a fence up above, which seems very common sense to many of us, versus leaving that cliff with no fence and allowing people to simply fall off and then, through our system, go ahead and clean up the mess all the time. And so this contrast in viewpoints, in this case, the ambulance drivers, the mainstream medical machine, this is not about prevention. This is about actually keeping the system generated. And so there's another interpretation of this, which is brought up to date by John Robbins in his book called Reclaiming Our Health back in 1996. So the first poem, again, I read to you was by Joseph Malins called The Ambulance Down in the Valley from 1895. So well over 100 years ago. And this is an updated version written by John Robbins of Reclaiming Our Health. It's an excerpt from John's book. Once upon a time, there was a large and rich country where people kept falling over a steep cliff. They'd fall to the bottom and be injured, sometimes quite seriously, and many of them died. The nation's medical establishment responded to the situation by positioning at the base of the cliff the most sophisticated and expensive ambulance fleet ever developed, which would immediately rush those who had fallen to modern hospitals that were equipped with the latest technological wizardry. No expense was too great, they said, when people's health was at stake. Now, it happened that it occurred to certain people that another possibility would be to erect a fence at that top of that cliff. When they voiced this idea, however, they found themselves ignored. The ambulance drivers were not particularly keen on the idea, nor were the people who manufactured the ambulances, nor those who made their living and enjoyed prestige in the hospital industry. The medical authorities explained patiently that this problem was far more complex than people realized, that while building a fence might seem like an interesting idea, it was actually far from practical, and that health was too important to be left in the hands of people, carpenters, who were not medical experts. Leave it to us, they said, for with enough money we will soon be able to genetically engineer people who do not bruise or become injured from such falls. So no fences were built, and as time passed, this nation found itself spending an ever-increasing amount of its financial resources on hospitals and high-tech medical equipment. In fact, when it came to spend far more money on the medical services than any nation had ever done in the history of the world, money that could have gone to community services, decent housing, education, and good food was not available to the people, for it was being spent on ambulances and hospitals. As the cost of treating people kept rising, growing numbers of people could not afford medical care. The more people kept falling off the cliff, the more a sense of urgency and tension developed, and the more of the country's money was poured into the heroic search for a drug that could be given to those who had fallen to cure their injury. When some people pointed out how fruitless the search had been thus far and questioned whether a cure would ever be found, the research industry answered with massive public relations campaigns showing men in white coats holding the broken bodies of children who had fallen, pleading, "Don't quit on us now, we are almost there." When a few families who had lost loved ones tried to erect warning signs at the top of the cliff, they were arrested for trespassing. When some of the more enlightened physicians began to say that the medical authorities should publicly warn people that falling off the cliff was dangerous, representatives from powerful industries denounced them as health police. A fierce battle ensued, and finally, after many compromises, the medical establishment did issue warnings. Anyone, they said, who had already broken both arms and both legs in previous falls should exercise utmost caution when falling. Of course, this is just a fable. That story version of the interpretation written by John Robbins back in 1996 in his book Reclaiming Our Health is just a fable, of course, that connotes the historical theme that's gone on in our mainstream medical system. Frankly speaking, by the way, is not about saying medical care is bad or wrong. Frankly speaking is about getting clear on what we have to do as human beings, where health comes from, and how the confusion that's created in our industry, in the world, and how the United States is 37th or worse in health status, in health, the health of this nation. So we rank that low in the health based on our choices and our system that we create. Now, granted, I repeat, and I say this often, If I break my leg, or I have a heart attack, or I need acute emergency care, we have the best system in the world for advanced technology. However, when it comes to chronic care, which is an example of opioid crisis, a problem that was generated and created by Big Pharma, which is quite interesting. But that's an example of chronic care. So when it comes to chronic health challenges, we have very much to be desired in terms of a system that is actually effective. And that's where structurally and functionally, when we look at restoring normal function to the body, that is the true answer to chronic problems, even though preventing them in the first place is the real solution. And that's what we talk about, and that is a main purpose of this podcast, is to discuss ways that are viable, practical lifestyle choices that yield fantastic, incredible, uncommon results in our healthcare system. Even though there is profit in actually offering healthy alternatives to folks now, because that is not something that's easy to find. That is something that it takes knowledge to understand the big system and how the system has created ill health in the process, that it actually ingrains and generates your ability to get into the system. And so, yes, this is arguable. Yes, this is under debate. But if you just start thinking for yourself, which again is not what they want, then you can start to understand. So I love the fact that this poem just talks about sensibility. It talks about common sense knowledge, that you are always better off being proactive in preventing than you are haphazardly stepping off a cliff. That makes no sense. So what you put into your body, how you take care of yourself, these are all things that generate health over time. And complete disregard for them only feeds the system, feeds the big machine. And so my passion and my heartfelt share today is that I want to build a foundation for people, and a foundation of understanding health, not a foundation that you contribute to at this point. At least that's not in my agenda. But a foundation, so you have a foundation to go, where does my health come from? Who's responsible for this? Not to blame someone else. It's where am I responsible for my health, and where can I be more accountable? And what do I do every day that is either building health or not? You're either building health or tearing it down. You're either in a health promotion, health building behaviors and activities, or you're destroying it. And so at whatever level, and we are dynamic. It's a continuum. It's not just I do this every day, therefore I am. It's how do you put this all together? And that's what this is about as well. There's so many different topics. There's so many different factors that play a role in health. And you abdicate, ABDICATE, you abdicate your health to your doctor, you will not have health. I'm going to repeat that. If you abdicate your health responsibility to your doctor, you will not have health. The system does not care whether you're healthy or not. The system has protocols. Your doctor follows protocols. Protocols have been set up by pharmaceutical industry and lobbyists. Therefore, if you abdicate your health to your doctor, you will not be healthy. You must become your own best health advocate for yourself and your family, which takes some effort and an awareness, but you build on that one day at a time. So my question for you is this, twofold. Where in your life are you overlooking any preventive measures or being proactive with your health? Just the simplest thing. Don't make this difficult. This is not about how challenging you can make it. I'm literally asking you a question so you can ask yourself better questions where you might be able to make a micro adjustment in how you view your body, the responsibility you have with it, maybe how you convey your behaviors and actions with prevention or proactivity to your kids and how they're influenced by your behaviors, whether you see it as I'm a victim, I add pills from the outside, and I'm always trying to manipulate my body because I want it this way, and society expects that, and society has norms. So where can you see your either preventive measures improving? Where have you made some improvement? Acknowledge those. Where can you see yourself being in small adjustments, more proactive for your health? Where can you start to take charge? How you might grocery shop? how you might look at meal planning with your family. It might be how you manage your health from exercise, nutrition, your spirituality, your mental capacity, your ability to measure where your stress is. Remember, and this will be in an upcoming episode, stress is not the event. So a traffic jam is not stress. A traffic jam is a traffic jam. Some people take the time to sing in a traffic jam, and they rock it. They kick some butt. I mean, I've seen it happen. And others are stressed by that. It's how we perceive the event in our body, and what our body does with that is what the stress is. So stress isn't the event. Stress is what we do with it. Stress is how we see it. So where can you actually see your stress more, measure it, and come to terms with, why am I taking that so serious? How do I let that bother me so much? Where can I dump some things that are really not mine, they're someone else's, or they're someone else's stress that's now placed on me? And so look at this from the standpoint of, where in your life could you shift gears and be more preventive and not only save your family dollars and cents, you're going to make more health movement, and you're going to move that dial on a dynamic continuum. You're going to move your health toward less disease. You're going to move it toward health from disease or dis-ease, dis-ease, towards health. And so when you start to make those moves, that is self-generated. And I want to be there when the person you're destined to be meets the person you are. Until next time, my friends, be well. Ciao. As always, I just want to thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and I look forward to our next time. Okay, my fellow health warriors, it's time to head over to iTunes, frankly speaking, drwade.com. There, you can rate, review, and subscribe, as well as share, so more of our brothers and sisters can grow to realize their voice and their health. Speaking up means you matter. We'll see you next time. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views expressed here are not meant to replace the medical advice of your doctor. This podcast, including Dr. Wade Annenson and his guests, disclaim responsibility for any adverse effects you may experience from the specific use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse and accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.